it's also the nanoparticles, or like this Ormus monoatomics, that you're breaking down without using electricity or high energies, just through vortexy air in this WindHex device, and that is
right now, all I'm not interested in I'm not interested in the cement or any of that stuff. I'm interested in this idea that they've pulverized this stuff and turned it into a kind of, if I'm following you correctly, a kind of ionized dust plasma, an endothermic plasma. Am I understanding?
Yeah, he said it right. You caught on freaking quick. If this is the first time you're hearing about this, holy cow.
And that I also suspect and speculate that it's a liquid crystal, because they're saying they're putting it into water, and that when you spin it into that vortex, that can create the plasmid reaction, the cavitation, and the ionization reactions.
Don't forget the fact that the Racine turbine is somehow in the process.
The turbine's what's spinning, causing the water crystal to be in the twister.
And remember, Delschow illustrated that rudimentary proof of concept form of the bell. So could that be the spinning device that would have done the same thing as the hex technology you're talking about? It would cause the torsion. Remember, Delschow showed that they were using a bell.
There would be a differential rotation if you're inducing this in a waterborne endothermic plasma, which it sounds like that's what's going on.
That's exactly what's going on.
Holy cow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, because when you start talking about that hex thing, I immediately thought of, oh, well, he said they were using the bell. He illustrates it, and he even describes it. It's just vertical instead of horizontal the way the graphic show. But I imagine that doesn't matter, right? The hex can be vertical.
Well, the hex is actually in the same orientation as the bell. It's just that the Wilkes vortex is normally shown in the other orientation. But if we look at the WindHex side diagram, which we haven't seen yet so far in the live, it actually is in the same orientation as we normally see a twister coming out of a cloud. So it's basically a giant cone. It's just like a giant cone. Like I imagine that you took a kitchen funnel, but instead it's like 6 feet tall, and you injected air heading towards from the top edge at an angle towards the bottom, so that it would spiral down, sort of like in the same coin would take when you drop it down a funnel.
All right,
there's a cone in the center, and it comes back up from the pressure increase.
All right, my next question is, what are you? You've got all of this whipping around in some sort of vortex tube, and I'm looking at it now, but I need to read about it. And you're doing all of this in a liquid plasma, an ionized plasma, that essentially is a pulverized granite and chromium.
Well, it can be any elements. I mean, we've seen actually videos of the guy throwing like glass bottles in there, and then coming out as dust, throwing plastic bottles in there, coming out as dust, throwing rocks and other like materials, even hay in there, it coming out as dust. He threw all kinds of stuff in there. Feed comes out as dust.
All right. So my next question is, what kind of electrical potentials are you mixing into this mix?
He's not mixing anything in the original. He's simply using the electrostatic differential between the inside and outside vortex based on velocity to separate the natural ionic charge of these particles.
All right. Interesting. So there's no externally introduced electrical potentials at all.
That is correct.
So it's all, in other words, you're dealing essentially with a plasma that is relying on all of its electrical potential coming from the piezoelectrics of the materials that you're dealing with.
That's right. And it turns out that every single thing seems to have a self-generating natural electric field where under stress, when it's separated, there's always certain amounts of elements in every single material. Like, say you have a grain, you throw a bunch of, grains in there. Say you throw popcorn kernels in there. Well, those popcorn kernels are generally rigid. You wouldn't expect them to fall apart if you just spin them around. Okay. But in this case, in the hex version, the inside kernels are traveling at a different velocity as the outside kernels, and they actually hit each other so that they do smash together. And that difference in velocity, it does cause them to break apart. Well, because the popcorn kernels are made of a variety of different elements, including iron, phosphorus, magnesium, a bit of silica, potassium, all kinds of different materials that inside these natural, plant-growing popcorn kernels. Well, the thing is, they have different electric potential equivalents, and if you go on like the electrostatic potential for each of those elements, you'll find that they have different numbers. So when you try to rip them apart molecularly, and they're separated, they generate an electric potential based on their velocity that's like a triboelectric effect. And so they naturally ionize. And that difference means a negative entropy for the higher potential particles that are on the inside versus the lower potential particles on the outside. So not only do the electrons actually transit the thermokinetic energy and heat up the outside, but they also transfer their binding energy. And when it reaches low enough, the inside becomes cold, the electrons on the inside fly off. And so the protons are exposed and they sort of smash against each other, hence the transmutation.
And you've written all of this up as a possible explanation for.
I haven't had to write it up. There's actually tons of videos.
Bob
about
Grenier
12 hours of videos on this.
Yeah, but it's Bob Grenier's the academic and the main person behind it all. Do you know who Bob Grenier is, head of the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project out of the UK? Joseph? No. Awesome individual. We'll have to connect you to.
Yeah, email me all of this stuff. This is very interesting sounding stuff, and it sounds to me like you're onto something here as a possible explanation for Delshaw's soup. This is very, very
well. We're going to get some of this mariposite sent to us, hopefully within the month here. If
I'm going to get Olav to help you with that, because Joseph, I don't know if when we were up there last weekend, Malia and I saw an abundance of this stuff in Tuolumne County. And then we discussed it with Olav, and we three came to the conclusion that I don't know if you recall me suggesting a couple years ago that I thought it might be liquid emerald, and we thought we were onto something. But when I learned about mariposite and I saw this stuff is green, I thought, my gosh, it's found in Tuolumne County. Duh, there it is, liquefied mariposite, and on and so forth.
Let me make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying one more time.
Yeah.
To whoever it is that's talking about the physics of this.
Exotic propulsion.
You're dealing with essentially an endothermic plasma state, a dust plasma state of the mariposite, but if I'm understanding you correctly, that plasma state is being induced inside of water.
Correct. So essentially it's because that's what the description is that Walter said, is that it was.
That's what Delschow said that Peterman has used. Yeah,
and I understand. Yes, I understand.
So my background is like working electrolysis,
right,
experimenting in alchemy, monoatomics, and all of that. And it's seeing that, combining it, researching the ancients' high technology of this geopolymer, and breaking material down into these nanomaterials, the nanotechnology, and that once you get into this ormus, what they call the ormus or the monoatomics, but the single atom dust of these particles, then you're able to do the chemical reactions, and that ancient alchemy and the suppressed part of alchemy is the cold fusion chemistry, electrochemistry aspects of it that happen in and out of water with the
okay. Let me stop you again.
All over the map.
All over the map. Let me back you up. So are you arguing, or are you implying or suspecting?
Just suspecting right here.
Yeah. Let me ask the question before you answer it, so that you make sure that you're understanding what I'm asking. Are you implying that it's your suspicion that this endothermic waterborne plasma state of this mariposite is also in a monatomic state? In other words, we're dealing with a waterborne ionized monatomic plasma of mariposite. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Actually, that is what I suspect with it, and that it's a key part of just like how nature chemical.
Let me answer his question too on the technical side. I have never thought about the question that you just asked, which is, could these element interactions be monoatomic? Well, what I suggested earlier is that the electrons are stripped off due to the difference in velocity in the negative entropic state, because the electrons are what carry the thermokinetic energy for the Brownian motion and ultimately are responsible for the transfer of heat from one atom, one atomic atom of any given element. Versus, instead of it being in a molecular state where you have two or more atoms, you have a singular atom. And so if it loses the electrons, it's basically going to be in a singular atom state, because what is responsible for covalent bonds between atoms to form molecules? Well, it is the electron valences. So if you strip the electrons off, you lose the covalent bond, and things tend to fall apart in differences in velocity or different reference frames into the monoatomic state. So, to your question, because you brought it up, which is a genius question, a really great question, it would be likely that all of these elements would go from diatomic, triatomic, quadratomic, or whatever number of atoms are bound to a number of water molecules when both the water molecules leave and the electrons in the valence shells are exhausted and transferred to the outer vortex, that they would likely go monoatomic because the binding energy for covalent bonds is broken. And so I think that what you brought up is actually a very likely outcome. And it shows that
also, sorry, just to add into that, it's either monoatomic or plasmid clusters.
Plasmid would be a monoatomic state with ionization. Monoatomic state with ionization is a plasmid formation. It is an ionized gas, a plasma technically. So he would be right. He'd be absolutely right.
And that it's also the water, when it's a key part of it having to be this monoatomic dust part, is that it would instant dissolve into water to, have an exponentially better reaction and possibility of it. And nuclear soup, essentially, cold fusion soup is what I see happening.
You're going to lose your water. You're going to lose your water from the inside column. Will you have heat transfer from one column to the other, from the inside vortex to the outside vortex? You're also going to lose your water from the inside vortex to the outside vortex. The water has a tendency to be more stable than other molecules, so it will hold on to its electrons longer. Hence, it will continuously be heavier, and it will be the most prevalent thing to be flung off first before you actually get molecular dissociation. The first thing that happens is you lose your water, because it's less likely to be molecularly dissociated between your H2 and your O compared to other molecules.
And that another key part that I see in this reaction is that you're going to have electrodes in an anode-cathode reaction going on within that water and within creating the vortex twister spinning of it. And that there's the cavitation happening at the heart of this reaction, and that you're also combining this fourth state of water where it creates the separation of the negative ionized water and the positive within it. And it's super complex here, so we're throwing a whole bunch of ideas all together, but just trying to figure it out. And
the water is very interesting. It doesn't have a single stable mode. It fluctuates between all these different modes, and actually, the bonds will change continuously, billions of times a second, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say you're going to have some very interesting phase state effects on all of this. Very interesting phase state.
Oh, I can't wait to play around with this stuff, man. You're gonna have to. This is good stuff, Walter. I'm glad that you're continuing the investigation, and because sometimes it's something stupid like this, where it doesn't make any sense to half the people you tell, but you tell someone like me and Jeremiah, and all of a sudden we're off running.
Well, that's why I couldn't wait I was really excited to tell you guys about this, because we were excited last weekend when us three figured it out, and we realized, hey, wait a minute, that's got to be the mystery element to the green soup.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, Walter, especially given the fact that it's in that area of the state where they were active too.
Specifically in that county and in abundance there. So Peter Menace would have had an endless supply virtually.
Right. You know, there's this Gerald-Pollack exclusion zone, right? And the big mystery is, how does water actually absorb the infrared spectrum or the ultraviolet spectrum in specific wavelengths in order to form a water crystal in a liquid state at room temperature? How could it possibly store the energy? Well, it doesn't gain electrons. It's clearly not an ionized reaction that causes it to form into this hexagonal, beautiful three-dimensional lattice. So how can it actually form in this way? What is it absorbing? Well, it turns out that you have two different formations of a double hydrogen. You have orthohydrogen, which is when you have your spins reversed from the two hydrogens, and you have your conventional H2, which is spin-aligned. And so spin-aligned contains far less energy than spin reversed, and orthohydrogen has different wavelength absorption bands. You sort of have, you know, these three different scales of energy absorption between the three states. So each band has either 3, 4, or 5 absorptions of photonic wavelength. But let's say that, you know, hydrogen H2 in the molecular state instead of the atomic state absorbs these different wave bands. It has to do with spin. And I think that the Gerald-Pollack exclusion zone in the water crystalline form that pushes other materials out because it's more stable in a coherent matter lattice is a direct result of hydrogen or H1 molecular flipping for spin polarization to either be counter-aligned or you know, coherently like aligned, and it's in that state where you get the emergence of this extra energy. So when you break it apart, water that's in the exclusion state where it has an orthohydrogen association, it not only releases the thermokinetic energy based on the Brownian motion at the velocity of the water of the hydrogen atoms, but it also releases the extra orthohydrogen energy, which produces a rapid acceleration. And this higher velocity causes a negative entropy. So I do think that it has to do with the orthohydrogen, especially in water, for the dissociation transmutation mechanism that causes the negative entropic state.
And just a very small amount of electricity will create that fourth state of water and the separation of charges and the different fields within it. We'll have to do a full separate episode in the future together. Well, all of us, but especially Joseph, as I've been following your work and research for a couple of decades, and then my own decade of experimentation with the electrolysis, the monoatomics, this fourth state of water, and just to show you a lot of the different results of some of my experiments. It's just fascinating, the self-organization that happens in these plasmids and the different reactions with the states of matter. And how I learned or got a lot of my discoveries was reading the translations of Sir Isaac Newton's recently released alchemy writing, and then noticing and reproducing these different alchemical states within my own metal reactions and experiments in the electrolysis and the monoatomics.
I wanted to mention too, you may want to pull up Fail Forward Research channel, because Wayne Ojna of his Canadian research effort in Fail Forward Research. Now, he has discovered that different temperatures of water will produce a significant weight gain or loss. And on his channel, he has several videos of experiments where he shows water and the hydrocarbons in wax significantly losing or gaining weight based on its ambient thermal temperature. And these values of weight gain and weight loss are way above the buoyancy equivalents in terms of thermal expansion. So we've tested this in isolated environments with covers, without covers, doesn't make a difference. Now, if you look up the chart too, so here's his channel, we're looking at it. He's got, you know, water experiments that actually show weight gain and weight loss and charts over time showing a class